Welcome back to another episode of Everyday Endorphins, a mental health podcast focused on the importance of finding joy and happiness in daily living. I'm your host, Stella Stephanopoulos, and this week I had the privilege of getting to sit down with Paige Goldstein on the podcast. She is a storyteller, brand strategist, and digital nomad who helps women build soul-aligned personal brands through her coaching platform called The Ripple Effect. She's also a fellow podcaster of the Fill Your Soul podcast, where she explores themes of travel, creativity, and living with purpose. Paige and I had the opportunity to connect a while back, about a year ago, at the Eudaimonia Summit, which is a conference that discusses topics around longevity, biohacking, and really what it means to live a well-lived life, which is the whole premise of eudaimonia, the Greek term. And was super excited to have her on the show to really talk about her approach to blending strategy with spirituality and entrepreneurship, and how she pivoted out of her corporate path, what it's like to live life as a digital nomad, and how she helps other founders storytell from an authentic perspective. Really excited for y'all to listen to this episode. But before we dive in, a reminder to like, rate, and review this podcast on whichever listening platform you prefer. Hi, Paige. Thank you so much for coming on to Everyday Endorphins. It is so lovely having you here this morning.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here and to connect deeper with you and your community.
I feel that our worlds coming together was very synchronous and perfect timing. And it's interesting because, for my listeners who are just getting acclimated to how we met, I think it was eudaimonia that we had first connected, but not in person. I don't think we met in person. I think we just connected on LinkedIn from both being at
Mm,
that event. And then months later, I got a message from you. And it was like perfect timing because I met someone that exact day that I received your message who ended up also knowing you. And so it was like, I feel like a sign from the universe that we were brought together.
yes. Yeah, I feel the same. And I think it's also just when you follow, the space where you're most aligned and interested in. Like Eudaimonia was like a really interesting health conference that I was so excited to go to. And so I think just similar worlds. And then when I messaged you on LinkedIn, it was like you were in Europe with someone that I had met in Europe as well. Also in like the wellness, like travel space too. So yeah, so
Mhm.
much alignment.
I know. And I know that alignment and consciousness is very much part of your brand, and kind of intersecting or like finding the synergies between entrepreneurship and building community, but also with like this focus on spirituality. So I'd love to start there actually and learn a little bit more about how you see the two intersect, or really like what that approach has been like for you when you think about building your brand, building community, but also really focusing on like the spiritual element of that.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's so much that goes hand in hand with consciousness and um, brand building, which is interesting. And just to share a little bit of my background, I have been traveling for the past 4 years. And so I think I studied psychology at university too, but I've always been fascinated in consciousness and, psychology and spirituality. But really, I think travel has opened up that world even deeper for me of like, how do we connect in other cultures with people beyond just like our bubble of what we know? And really, this level of connection and this oneness that I've experienced through travel, I think has gotten me even more interested in this whole space. And then bringing this side of yourself to personal branding and more authentic personal branding. And if you show up as like your true self online, how that is really this magnet for aligned opportunities and connections with people who are on your same frequency or same vibe. And that's something that I pretty much do full time now, which is guiding people back towards authentic expression online.
It's such a good point that you bring up. Like when you show up as yourself online, or even just in like the real world, generally speaking, when you live in alignment with like who you truly are, you attract the right people, the right opportunities. But the online part is like a different layer because I think by nature of being online, it can feel really performative to a degree. Like social media, we know that there's horrible effects on our mental health with social media. So, how do you actually, in practice, approach this idea of showing up authentically online? Like, what does that actually look like for you? And I know that you're very passionate about mental health and well being. So, a follow up to that question is also how do you prioritize your well being when engaging with these platforms? Because at the same time, in order to build a personal brand, you have to interface with Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok, all the platforms. So, what does that balance look like for you?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And I think social media can be like a blessing or a curse. And I always say it's based on how you use it. I always say my best advice is to be creating more than you're consuming. And I think as humans, our natural instinct is to create and to yeah, to be creative and to create. And so when that's blocked and all we're doing is scrolling or consuming, I think that's when social media can sometimes be doing more harm than good. And so that would be the first piece. And then two, also just knowing what style of creation interests you the most. So do you love writing? Like, does writing come intuitively to you? Do you love video content? Do you love photography? And then choosing the channel that makes the most sense for you. I think we sometimes have this pressure of like, I have to be an Instagram creator to be successful, to be an influencer. But if it's really hard, that can also be pulling away from your creative energy. Whereas for me, I just like, I know I've always loved writing and I can write something that has so much impact in like 2 to 5 minutes that a video could take me like days to create for Instagram
Hmm.
with a different type of impact. So I think just honoring like where are you most creative and then finding the right modality for you. Maybe that's Pinterest, maybe it's Twitter, maybe it's LinkedIn,
Yeah.
TikTok, and then putting your energy into one and then that's your main focus and then doing the other ones kind of more on the side or secondary to your main channel.
Yeah. That's a good point. I mean, I've been trying to also take that similar approach, creating more than consuming, because it's so
Mhm.
easy to mindlessly sit on your phone, scroll on Reels, scroll on TikTok, scroll on your feed. And I'm thinking to myself, the time that I'm sitting there wasting looking at random stuff, I could be making TikTok videos. I could be like exercising my brain in a creative way to talk about my podcast, to talk about things I've learned about happiness. Like there's ways that we can engage with these platforms that allow us to tap into our creativity, then fall into the comparison trap and like all these other detrimental effects to our well-being that social media draws out of us. I'd love to hear a little bit also about the pivot that you made from the traditional path that we all take, or most of us at least, where we go through, elementary school, middle school, high school, go to college for 4 years. Most people end up working a corporate job, right? I mean, I'm in that same position. You've traveled all over the world. You're a digital nomad. I feel like that lifestyle seems so glamorous on the outside and free and everyone's dream that's working in an office. I guess now maybe it's not 5 days a week, but still, like there is that back to office push. So tell us a little bit about that journey for you and what was going through your mind at the time to want to take that bold leap of faith and risk and create that lifestyle for yourself.
I like to share that I worked in an office for 3 months ever, and that was in my internship when I was commuting into Boston. And that job itself was at a marketing agency, so it was still, like, not super corporate, but from that moment of commuting into the city and working, I knew I did not wanna be in an office, so very soon on in my journey and my path, I had that kind of instinct of, like, "This is a not for me, so what will be?" Uh, and it was more of like it was enjoyable going to into Boston in the summer, but for me it was like, okay, it's an hour and a half on the train. and everyone looked unhappy. And then people are just walking mindlessly into the office. And for me, I was done with my work by like 11 a.m., but you stay there until 5. And I was just already questioning, like, whose rules are these? Like, why are these in place? Like, um, yeah. And like, what is beyond this? Is there something beyond this? And so I worked pretty much all through college for different like female founded companies. I worked at Bumble for a little, and I worked with a lot of e-commerce like startups in the like the female empowerment space. And so I had that experience of working online like while at college, and I would never go to the library to study. Like I was always laying in the grass studying. So I always knew like remote work worked for me. I knew what made sense.
Mhm.
I knew where I was most creative. And when I went to apply to jobs after I graduated, I knew I only wanted to apply to fully remote jobs with the intent of traveling. And I always said, like, I'll book a one-way flight, and worst comes to worst, I'll just come back if it doesn't feel good, if it doesn't work, if I don't feel like I'm doing well at my job. And so I booked a one-way flight to Hawaii, and it was amazing. And I extended right away. So not only was it like it was a test to see how I did, but I also felt like, wow, I'm thriving here, because when you're really happy outside of your work, I believe you do better at your work. And this doesn't just come from travel. I think like what you're doing is amazing. It's like you're teaching yoga, you are traveling too, you have your podcast, you have all these conversations. Like I believe when companies empower us to, enjoy outside of work, it's way more powerful also for our results and our satisfaction. And so, yeah, I traveled for 3 years working at that company and met other girls that I traveled with who were also remote. So we all just ended up like traveling together. And of course, there's pros and cons of nomading, which I'm like happy to share about too. Of course, we see the highlight reel, but it's not for everyone. There are a lot of hardships, and it's not like once you leave, your problems disappear. Like if anything, they amplify. Um, but it was
Mhm.
incredible. Like I would not change that experience for anything. And I spent the most time in South Africa. And fast forward, after 3 years at this company, I went to a wellness retreat and did yeah, just a lot of more deep inner work around breath work, and felt in that moment like my intuition really speaking to me, which was like I was done with my role at that company, and to like leave with no plan, and had this really gut instinct of like there's something else out there for me. And I've like learned everything I could at that company, and that was like that leap of faith I took to leave and take intentional time off to then create and pivot to what I'm doing now within the health and wellness and personal branding space.
Wow. I mean, what a journey. I feel like just from traveling alone, like how much life experience you can get in just those 3 years. You made a comment how when you about like there's some of the hardships with digital nomading, and when you leave a place you think your problems disappear but they amplify. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Is there like a particular moment that comes up for you, or can you just elaborate more on that, cuz I found that to be a really interesting point.
Yes. Yeah. And I think a lot of this is like no digital nomads, myself included, like we don't help the case in that it's glamorized, because people can only assume what they see, right? So that's also part of my journey of like authentic posting more authentically, because if we believe like, oh, they don't know this full scope of what's happening, it's like, of course, because they can't see that. And so the mind only sees these highlight reels on social media. So the first thing is that just social media isn't real. Like people are posting the best of the best, and they're not really posting the behind the scenes. There's some travel creators that I've seen that are doing an amazing job of doing that. um yeah, but some examples is just you're constantly meeting people and then saying goodbye. And so that comes up for me
Mm.
first, of like you make these amazing connections sometimes within 24 hours, because you have this level of shared similarities or background, or understanding of each other. So you can connect with someone within like a day, and then you're leaving. And so I think it's hard to form these deep connections and it's hard to always be saying goodbye. It's like amazing you have friends all over the world, but the flip side of that is that it's tiring to always be, having a home all over the world also gets quite hard. It's like your people are
Mm.
everywhere. Whereas like when you're in one spot, your people are right there. So that, and then the other piece is just the pace in which you travel. And so I think a lot of nomads, when they start, they get super excited where they're like, I'm fully remote. I'm going to go travel the world. So I want to do as much as I can. And then burnout is really easy to happen. Whereas you're traveling so quick, you're not actually living there. And so my advice
Mm.
for anyone like looking to nomad is like, how do you view it as living instead of traveling? Because if you're traveling for a long period of time, it's going to lead to burnout. Whereas how do you treat every day like you're living somewhere? And so I think that's a big misconception that people don't realize when they get into it, because you'll get burned out if you don't have these routines or systems in place.
Mm.
And you're always tempted to do something because you're like, I'm in Greece. Like, I'm in Greece for 1 month, but I don't want to go to the gym or have my morning routine. Like, I want to go explore. And so that happened to me for years. It was like, oh, I'm like out of this routine because I'm in all these new places.
Yeah, that's such a good point. When you're out of routine, at least for myself, it's really I something is off. Like I really don't feel good. Um and maybe it doesn't have to be like the most strict morning routine ever if you are on the road, but what are those like few grounding practices that you can do that help you kind of like feel in control of your day? Like feel like more like you're coming back to your sense of home within yourself. Um that's a good point you make too around kind of having friends all over the world. It's like a beautiful thing, but it's also really hard to feel like a sense of like one community in one spot. And I don't know when I travel, I've noticed this about myself. I am way more open to spontaneity and like maybe I'm in a different headspace where it feels like things just like happen right as they're meant to, and I feel like I get like an influx, an abundance of opportunity and cool things happening. And then I come back to New York and I'm like, where is the joy and the excitement with the place that I've lived in basically my entire life? And I don't know if other people who are listening maybe feel similarly. If they've been in a city for X amount of years, they're really comfortable, they're craving this change. To what degree is it, the comfort that's holding you back and the travel is what's getting you out of that? Or can you bring that travel mindset to your day to
Mm,
day? Because it's something I've been struggling with a lot. As you know, I had a really beautiful summer and spent a lot of time away actually. And I'm going back to Europe like this week.
mm,
I'll say over the course of a few months, I've spent maybe like 5 weeks not in New York over the summer, which is a decent amount of time. And coming back, I'm just like, nothing is exciting. Like things don't feel exciting. And I can't discern whether or not that is um a problem of like I've grown to be too comfortable here and it's time for something different,
mm,
or if travel has taught me how to be more go with the flow and grow into myself more, and I can take that mindset and bring it into a space where I'm fortunate to have that community of my people in one place at the same time.
mm,
So I'd love to hear your thoughts
mm.
on that because I'm sure a lot of people who are, who've hit that point in their lives and their careers where they're kind of like, this feels blah. Like I need to shake something up, but I don't know what that looks like.
Yes. No, it's such a good point, and I think it's such a balance because I think it's easy to associate like this joy and excitement outside of your present experience, but I think that's when travel can get a bit addictive, and I think like it's also cultivating that within yourself. And so I think for me, like really going down this spiritual path, it's like, okay, travel is this outer experience, and then how do you go back inward, which I know is like a lot of your work with yoga and what you teach too. It's like this inward experience, and also I think so much of us seek happiness externally. And so it's like the next flight, the next meal, the next activity, when it's like how do we cultivate that joy and peace within ourselves. So it's been such a contrast for me to have this outer experience of travel and new experience. And I love newness. Like I still reflect back on college. My favorite semester was like the first semester, the first month. And I think that's why there's such a thrill of travel for me. But it's also this balance of like, what does this inner world look like? Because if you're constantly chasing external like satisfaction, it's going to be a hard balance. So, and the other piece, which I've recently discovered, is I think that we bring, and yoga says this too, it's like we bring joy to every interaction and every experience. So the joy that we might see in Greece, in Croatia, it's like that's also within us. I think we just are more likely to see that there. And so I try to remember that when I'm back in my hometown or back in a place, it's like that joy is still within us. It's just just a reflection on the person that we're with, on the place that we're
Mm.
in, and challenging the norms of places. So, of course, walking the streets of New York City is different, but like, this connection and saying hello and like what you love in a place and an experience that you've had traveling, like how can you try to bring that back to where you are? And so I'm constantly trying to do that too. Um, except in different environments. I remember I was in New York City and they're like, you probably should not be saying hello to everyone you pass on the street.
Yeah, it's like be careful who you talk to. I think that's a
Yeah.
good point though, because it's like to do that, I think is a practice to help you not completely outsource your joy. And I talk about this, but then I still fall victim to it too because I'm only
Mhm.
human. Like I can only practice what I preach to a degree. Like it's a daily practice, it's a lifelong practice to try to check myself and remember that like there is that source of joy within me and I have to work on cultivating it within myself. I'm really curious to learn more about your experience, especially in South Africa, where you spent a lot of time. I've only met a few South Africans in my lifetime. And one thing that seemed to be very in common across the people that I've met and interacted with is this like love for the family and like being very family centric. And my gut is telling me like that value is probably what contributes to their happiness, or at least on the outside seeming to be more warm and open and happy and joyous. I'm curious to hear your reflections on that and just living there for so long. What about that culture did you really lean into, and what did you learn from the South African culture when you think about joy and and excitement and living in presence?
Hmm. It's interesting you bring that up because I've journaled on this before. I don't think I've like publicly shared this piece yet on my thoughts on just the balance of family life and the US. Like in the US, I think it's like you get like a gold medal. It's like amazing the younger you are to move out of your house. I think that's kind of the thing here. It's like, oh, they left at their house right after college. Whereas like in other countries, like in South Africa for sure, but also other countries that I've lived in, like it's very common for you to live with your family all the way up until you're married. And even when you're married, sometimes kids are still living, or your children are still living with parents. And at first, because you have this judgment or this conditioning from the US, it's like, oh, that's kind of weird. Like they're 30 and they're still living at home, or they're 35 and they're married and they're still with their parents. And so you have this initial reaction. And then I think through travel, you realize, like, why do I think that way? And then you see, like, wow, there's this beautiful bond and connection in this community. And then I kind of contrast it to the US where it's like, okay, we move out at 21 or 22, that's amazing, but then it's like we get in like a big apartment building with ourselves and we live alone, and that's like a that's also like a status thing, and then we're building up these walls basically with our connections and our families. And it's not the case for everyone, but I think there is that community piece, and you see like in certain blue zones in Europe or people that have like longevity, that community is the biggest piece. And so yeah, I've really compared. I was like, oh, I have this judgment towards, this 35-year-old that lives with their parents, but then at the same time, you live alone in a high rise, disconnected, and there's higher rates of depression or anxiety or isolation. And so, is there a middle ground? And like, are we actually doing it the right way? It's like, There's no right
Mhm.
way, you know?
Yeah. It's so interesting that you journaled about this and I
Yeah.
asked a question basically about this. It's
Yeah.
something I've been thinking about too because a lot of the friends that I've made in New York are not from here, and
Mm,
there's this hunch that I have that eventually they'll go back to the city that they're from. One of the driving factors to the desire to move back to your hometown is to be close to your family. And it's like, why do we feel this need to individuate so much or go so far away from our parents just to eventually return? Like, think about all the
mm,
time that you're missing. And I mean, I'm thinking out loud as I speak about this because I'm really fortunate that my parents are so close by. And in
mhm,
a way, maybe I've kind of taken it for granted because I've had it basically my whole life. And now I'm really trying to be cognizant of taking advantage of the fact that they're so close because
mm,
there might be a day when they're not so close. If I move, if they move, like who knows what could happen. And, um, this is just funny. Like yesterday, it was a Monday and I had nothing to do after work. And I could have just kind of relaxed at home or gone for a walk. And I ended up just calling my mom and be like, do you want to just go for a walk together? And it was that
mm,
like intentional quality time that I feel like was so special to have,
mm,
but it's not something that I feel like our culture like necessarily values or appreciates, like the intentional time with family.
mhm,
And I don't know, it's just something I've been thinking about recently, like how f- having access to family is like a really sacred and special thing.
mhm,
Was that something that was on your mind as you were digital nomading too, like especially being so far away from your
mhm.
family?
Yeah, it's interesting because this is like a very common conversation among nomads. And I went to a digital nomad conference actually in June, which had like 800 digital nomads there. And this was like a conversation that kept coming up where there's a difference, I think, between like quantity of time and quality of time. And so, as nomads, I think when you go back and see family, you're way more intentional with your quality of time. Whereas sometimes I think the if you are living close, it's like checking a box like, oh, I have this value of family because we live 20 minutes away. But the thing that I think nomads are more aware of is like, what is the quality of time? Because we don't have that much time with our friends. We're maybe with them for 1 month and then we go to another country and then we're back with family maybe for a month. And so I think the quality piece is way more top of mind rather than just like quantity. Like I see them every now and then, or we're like proximity, but are you actually like close? And so I think that's something that really has become more aware for me of like they can be close, but are you actually spending time with them too? You know, and that intentionality, I think it just gets heightened because you have to have it heightened when you are there for less amount of time.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I love that you bring up this term intentionality because I think no matter if you're a digital nomad or not, it's so important to live life with intention. And
Mm,
sometimes the best way to, I think, do that is when you're faced with like the complete opposite end of the spectrum where you're realizing you've not been living intentionally. Like sometimes I think we need these extremes to get us to some sort of like baseline or middle ground.
yeah.
And I think that like for me, this idea of intentionality is really just like being present, I think. Like not living in a distracted way, but being right where my feet are at.
Mm,
And I don't know, is this something that for you has become more apparent just through being like in so many different places in your life, like so many different locations, meeting so many different people? Or was this something that came to you through that wellness retreat? Like when did that kind of become front and center in your mind and in the way that you live your life?
yeah. I think a couple things come to mind. Like the first, I don't know if you're familiar with Eckhart Tolle.
Mm-hmm.
But I saw him speak when I was in Cape Town in South Africa, and he wrote the book The Power of Now, and I had read that, and then I saw he was coming to Cape Town, and so his talk and his books, it's all around like the power of now, and that all we really have is the present moment, and that our mind can wander to like the past or the future, but like this presence is the only thing that truly exists. And I think that can get harder, like when you nomad in a way, because you are missing people in different places. So it's like a practice that I think is I've always worked on, is like, how can I try to just be where I am, even though maybe I'm flying somewhere the next week or I'm planning this trip. And so the downside is that I don't love, having to plan the next thing, because I think it takes away from where I am. And the other thing around intention, that it's kind of like a side note, but I use intention working with people with building their brands. And I think in having an intention related to your brand or just life, I like intention rather than goals, but I think intention can help us achieve what we want so much faster. Um, and specifically, we talk a lot about intention with brand building and the ripple effect of like, how do you set your intention of why you're even posting in the first place? Because I think so many people start posting or building their brand without even knowing their why or their original intention. And so I think that can really just help you like really create your own reality of like, where am I headed based on what I want, and then how do you work backwards from there of your end intention.
Yeah, that's a good point. I feel like it's very easy to be mindless when, especially when sharing things online. Or I even had this moment where like 2 years ago, I think it was about, I just kind of lost my why. I had
Mm,
it at a point, and then I realized that the why that I was operating under was like not actually in service of me or like the process of building. It was more from like an egoic perspective. And
mm,
I didn't like that. Like it was really hard to admit that to myself, that my why was no longer about like effectively community building, but it was more like coming from this lack. It was coming from like,
mm,
oh, I'm not doing enough. So my why is
mhm,
that I'm going to just keep doing more to keep doing more so that
mhm,
it'll eventually be enough. But like that is such a negative spiral to go down. So
mm,
I had this like reckoning with like, oh, what is actually my why? And I had to actually take some time away to figure that out and figure out why, and this is going to sound ridiculous, but why my why was the way it was. Like I had to better
yeah.
understand where that was coming from. So it's very powerful to do that type of work with entrepreneurs and people who are building brands and companies, which I think is a great segue into talking a little bit more about what you're doing now, working with founders and creatives and building your brand, the ripple effect. So, can you talk a little bit more about what that journey's been like for you and where you're headed with the ripple effect? What excites you about what you're doing?
You make such a good point about the why, and I think so many of us actually don't even reflect on what our why is, but I think especially with building, creating, being a founder, influencing, it's like you need that why, because not every day is going to be smooth sailing. And so to have something to fall back on, which is like, what is this purpose? What is my why? What's my overall mission? I think is just so important, especially, yeah, as you're creating something. So I so resonate with that. And I think also just giving yourself grace that that can change in time. And I think that was my biggest realization. Like when I was building my brand on LinkedIn, it's like my why and my brand also grew with me in time. And so I'll share a little bit about the ripple effect. So I created the ripple effect, which is really a movement to get more soul led, authentic content on LinkedIn. And so working with soul led female leaders, conscious leaders. Another part of the mission is really to get more light workers, more healers, more people within the spirituality space on LinkedIn. I feel like typically we see these voices on podcasts or Instagram. And I had this realization of like, wow, these role models in my life aren't on this platform. And this platform has so much power. Yet I'm seeing all of these, CEOs in corporate men with power, and I really wanted more spiritual like healers, and these are really the voices I think that with the voices still on LinkedIn is going to change the world. Um and bringing in more of this healing and this remembrance as well. So when I left corporate, I had been building my brand around text message marketing, which is like the software I was selling. And I just saw how powerful it was to really establish this credibility with what I was selling, what I was doing. So even to this day, I still get messages like asking for text message marketing. And so what I learned is like then I started integrating travel and digital nomading, and that allowing yourself to shift and evolve with your brand. Um, and then when I left my job, I basically was like, I have two choices. One, I can stop posting until I have a title, or two, I can lean into authenticity and actually share that I'm choosing to leave and I actually have no idea what is next. And that I'm really like scared, but that it happened and like there was no other option other than for me to trust my intuition. And so basically it's this movement of just like building in public, but like not even building, it was just being open and honest. And it was for what I wish I saw, because obviously it's a human experience to not know sometimes or to feel a calling to leave. And I felt like I didn't see any of that content on LinkedIn. And so it felt like this lonely leap of faith where once I started writing that way, I've called in a huge audience of people who feel the same or people who have gone through a similar path. They just haven't shared that.
Mm.
And so with my goal of the intention with the brand, how that weaves in is like I set an intention to pivot into like the health and wellness and spirituality space. And I basically reverse engineered like how do I create my brand to call in this opportunity, this founder, this company. And that's how it happened. I shifted into the spiritual wellness space, worked with an app, ended up going to Udemy. That was around the same time. And then right around then was started at that company. Then they asked for support on their LinkedIn personal brands because they're like, we don't know how to talk about spirituality on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Um, and from there launched the Ripple Effect.
Because spirituality can feel very esoteric and business can feel very corporate and buttoned up and serious. And it's like taking, like, spirituality isn't soft, but there's power in like the softness that comes with that and how you apply it to a more quote unquote hard world, more masculine, energetic, like
Mm-hmm.
space, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, which I think is really interesting. And also just the fact that like LinkedIn's been the platform that you've leaned into, I think is fantastic because I think the platform now is also favoring creators who are opening up in this way. And
Yes.
there's like this movement now. Like I think the platform is supporting people like yourself to
Mm-hmm.
build their brands, to build their voice in a similar way that I feel like even Substack is blowing up and people are sharing their voices on that platform too. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I think like the timing was really amazing for you, but also the fact that like you're bringing this like really kind of almost like taboo perspective to a corporate platform shakes things up in the way that I think it needs to be shaken up. When we're
Mm-hmm.
talking about like showing up as ourselves at work and like being authentic and being human in the workplace, like you have to live those values. You have to express those values. And so it would only make sense that LinkedIn would be a platform to support that kind of storytelling if we're saying that people are happier at work when they're happier in their own personal lives. Like how do we express that? How do we show up as our whole selves with the people that we're working with? Um, so I think it's really remarkable.
Yeah, and to your point about the creator space and LinkedIn, like I truly believe we're at the very like beginning of the creator space on LinkedIn. Like only 1% of people actually post on LinkedIn right now. And so there's such a saturated market, especially for coaches or founders or creatives on Instagram. Whereas LinkedIn, it's just this open space. Also with like more buying power. It's like you see a lot of coaches or founders trying to launch on TikTok, and it's sometimes difficult because it's like, okay, you can have so much interest, but then what is the buying power? Who are these people? Whereas like you're talking to actual, their profiles are legit, they have a profile, and then the average income of a user on LinkedIn is 70K. And so you're talking to a more like established audience in terms of buying power for what you do create too. So I think both of that goes hand in hand,
Yeah.
which is just, yeah, so interesting. And I think also for creators, like video is also common on LinkedIn, and you can also not have to, like, back to the point of before, like curate your profile like you'd have to do on Instagram or feel like you have to do on TikTok, whereas you just write and your
Mhm.
profile can find the right people through your words and connections.
Exactly. That's a great point. I want to pivot a little to talking more about happiness, given that Everyday
Hmm.
Endorphins is all about cultivating
Yeah.
joy in life. And you had this really beautiful post on Instagram that I saw recently. It was like a reel of you doing yoga in a scenic background. And I was like, I want to be Paige right now. But the text on the video was a really beautiful, like, message about happiness being cultivated within. So, a few final questions for you.
Hmm.
The first is, how do you define happiness? Was there a
Hmm.
particular moment in your life that made you rethink what it means to be happy?
Hmm. I love this question. Yeah, I think happiness to me goes along with defining it for yourself. I think happiness, I think right away of success, right? And like what those mean. And I think defining what success means to you or what your intention or your goal is in your life, and then knowing what that is for you so that you're not striving for someone else's definition of success. I think that can lead towards a lot of unhappiness where maybe you are experiencing unhappiness, but is that because you're not attaining someone else's? So I would say, yeah, finding what success and joy means to you and then following that to cultivate that happiness with yourself.
Yeah, we get really caught up in the comparison mindset for sure, thinking
Hmm.
that like someone else's path is what we need to replicate. And if we don't do it, then we're not going to be happy, or thinking that, we want what someone else has. So what we have is never enough. I mean, another guest of mine said something so beautiful about how happiness is a state of gratitude. It's
Hmm.
a feeling that comes when you are grateful. And to practice gratitude, it's like also a practice that gets you in the present moment. And it's like being in that state is what brings more of the joy and happiness in life. So I like that response, like adding on to that. It's like not measuring up your own self worth or happiness or idea of success against someone else's because it's unique to you.
And to that too, I think we might expect ourselves to be happy when we follow what we think success should look like. And you see that people earning seven figures at a corporate job and asking themselves why they're not happy. They have the car, they have the house, they have the relationship, and they're not happy. And so I think it's important to define, like, do I want all of that stuff before you're just striving for all of that? And then you might not experience this happiness that you have been seeking, where maybe it's like within yourself and your own definitions.
Yeah. We get very lost in chasing, I think, the immediate dopamine,
Mm-hmm.
like the quick win. Like we want more, 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 more. And it's okay to want things. It's okay to be ambitious and to want certain things to support a lifestyle that you want to live. But it's also important to check ourselves, as our human nature can sometimes defy like the principles of happiness because we
Mm-hmm.
operate on survival mode and mechanism,
Mm-hmm.
right? And like that's kind of the opposite of just being present. Because back in
Mm-hmm.
those days, if you were just present in the moment, what if there's a tiger coming to kill you? Like you
Mm-hmm.
have to be looking out and thinking that, but like we're not living
Yeah.
in those times. So we have to remind ourselves, okay, let's be grounded.
Right. Mm-hmm. It's like a lot of unlearning, I think,
Mm,
because of our systems and just generations. It's like they didn't have the privilege that we have now to have this safety where we don't have to worry about that, you know?
yes, exactly. And this brings me to my final question for you, Paige, which is something I ask everyone on the podcast. And it's really focused on finding the things in life that just spark joy. So, to that point, I would love to hear from you. What is something that brings you a bit of endorphins every day?
Mm, I love this question. I would say what first comes up is time in nature, like hiking or even just laying out in the sun. I think there's something so powerful and healing about time in nature and this natural energy boost that I get from that.
Oh, I love it. And I'm sure you've had amazing exposure to nature with all the places you've traveled to. So I am envious of that. But there is also, to that point, beautiful nature to be found on the East Coast and like right outside of New York City. So, how can I replicate that same feeling without being in a cool place like South Africa or Croatia or I mean, the list goes on. But nature is very healing. It's very grounding. Someone actually told me this once. I was with a friend and she was like, hiking is the one activity where you actually like can't be on your phone, like where you're actually
Mm,
having a present conversation with someone because you can't be on your phone.
hmm.
Oftentimes you just don't have service. You're not, even if you do, you're not just looking at your phone texting because you need to look at the ground in front of you.
Yes. Yeah, no, it's very true. That and I found a lot of like joy in rock climbing and then also yoga. Like yoga outside for me is also just so amazing. Like yoga in nature,
Mm-hmm.
meditating in nature too. And I think it's to your point about that. It's like you don't have your phone. It's like more connection and more times where you actually like need your hands for things too.
Exactly. Paige, it's been such a pleasure having you on the podcast. I'm so
Yeah.
glad that we were able to do this. And I would love for you to share a little bit more about where people can find you and stay connected with you. And if they want to work with you, how can they get in contact with you?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It was so fun chatting deeper and further. And yeah, if anyone wants to get in touch on LinkedIn, Instagram, and TikTok, I'm on all of those channels. LinkedIn, I'm on the most. But it's my first and last name, so Paige Goldstein. And that would be the best way to get in touch. And then in all of those bios is a link if you guys want to go further into the work and how to potentially work together. But if you've listened, would love for you to say hi on any of those platforms.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. It was so fun.